Hello, in this video, I'll be talking about qualitative research designs. And this is not at all an exhaustive list of all of the available methodologies that we use in qualitative research, but I just wanted to highlight a few. So starting with narrative research. So this is a type of methodology that we use to collect and analyze stories from participants. So in this type of research, we're trying to understand more about the lived experiences of a person or of a group of people. And that's in the context of history and social contexts. And so in narrative research, the participants are working together with the researcher. So they're sort of working as a team to build this historical and social context and tell the story of what those participants' experiences are like. And then also to interpret those experiences in those contexts. So it helps give insight into how people make decisions, quality of life, and other things that we may not get from quantitative research, where we can't just ask a question, or we can't give a questionnaire, ask some questions and get the answers, where maybe we need to dig deeper and look into all of the context to understand what the lived experiences are like for that group of people. So an example is that we might use narrative research if we want to learn about what it's like for a group of people who have rheumatoid arthritis, just as one example. So what are their lived experiences like? What is their day-to-day life like? What kind of pain do they have? What is their medical treatment like? How do they feel? So if you're just trying to explore the experiences of a group of people, then we might use narrative research. Phenomenological research, we're studying a phenomenon. So we're trying to understand the essence of a particular phenomenon or lived experience. So something that a person might go through or participate in. So it's more about understanding the nature of the phenomenon and less about the actual people themselves. So narrative research, we're learning about the people. Phenomenological research, we're learning more about the phenomenon by learning about the people who have experienced that phenomenon. So in this case, the researcher tries to separate themselves from the participants and the phenomenon. So it's more of a separation between the researcher and the participants versus a narrative research. They're more collaborative. So the researcher and the participants are working together more in narrative research. So to take that same example of rheumatoid arthritis patients, if we're doing phenomenological research, then we would pick a phenomenon that we're studying. So the population might be the same. It might still be rheumatoid patients, but here maybe we're exploring the phenomenon of a rheumatoid patient selecting an exercise program that works for them. Easier said than done, because not enough exercise can cause a flare-up and too much exercise can cause a flare-up. So that's one of the phenomenons, or one of the experiences of that particular group of people, is having to find the right balance of physical activity to help improve their condition and not cause any flare-ups. So how do you get exercise without making the condition worse? And so if you're trying to learn about that phenomenon of how they select that program, or maybe which program ultimately works best for them, then we might use phenomenological research. Okay, grounded theory is exactly what it sounds like. It's where you're generating a theory grounded in data. That's why it has that name. So the purpose in grounded theory research is to generate a new theory to help explain a certain social process or certain thing that is common to human experience of whatever group that it is that you might be studying. So in grounded theory research, you're collecting and analyzing data at the same time. So it might be done through interviewing, focus groups, qualitative surveys, that all different sorts of ways of collecting that data. And when those pieces of data are collected, then they're analyzed as we collect them. And when we analyze them, we're coding the data and categorizing the data and trying to detect any themes that are emerging from the responses that the participants are giving as you're collecting that data. So you're analyzing, coding, and looking for themes as you're collecting that data. And so eventually you reach what we refer to as saturation of data, meaning that you've collected enough data that you're no longer coming to new, there's no longer new themes or new categories to add, that it's saturated, that everything that you're collecting and learning from your participants is consistent with everything that you've already collected. And that's when you would know in this type of methodology that you have sampled appropriately and you don't need any more participants. So this is a great way to learn more about a social process, or maybe it's about decision making, or it could be behavioral. And so then you take those kind of themes and categories that emerge from your analysis as you're analyzing the interviews or the focus groups or whatever it is that you're finding. And so you're integrating that and building all those categories into a theoretical framework. And that's where the theory comes from. So you're learning from this group of people and then taking all of these different people's experiences and things that they're sharing with you, and you're building a theory, you're building a framework out of that to help understand other behaviors and to be able to apply to other things in other areas. Okay, ethnography is the study of a culture. Now, you can study a culture as a member of that culture. So that would be emic, so observation from within the culture. So I've mentioned rheumatoid arthritis. I have rheumatoid arthritis myself. I don't know if it's necessarily a cultural group to study, but just as an example of emic is that if I have rheumatoid arthritis and I am studying other people with rheumatoid arthritis and maybe a culture that exists within those types of patients, then that would be emic. Versus etic would be observation from outside of the culture looking in. So that could be a person of one race, a researcher of one race who is studying the culture of a different race. Or it doesn't have to be race, it could be any aspect of culture. Like I mentioned rheumatoid arthritis. I don't know if we necessarily have our own culture, but maybe, I don't know. But all sorts of populations and all sorts of groups have their own existing culture within an organization or within a group who shares a similar condition or whatever it is. So emic, if the researcher also is part of that group, and etic, if the researcher is outside of that group and wanting to study the group. So ethnography is really useful to understand the beliefs, values, and practices of a particular group, which it can be really important. If you're trying to design a program or an intervention or something for a certain group, it won't be effective if your program is in violation or directly conflicting with some other beliefs or values of that group that you're designing the program for. And so it's important to have a good understanding of those things so that you can learn about how the group adapts to change, how likely they are to want to participate, what the value is that they think that culture, the members of that culture might perceive from your intervention. Like to go to the rheumatoid example, we could say, well, rheumatoid patients in general maybe believe that exercise will cause a flare-up. I don't know if that's true or not. I haven't actually studied that, but I'm just making up an example right now, is that if rheumatoid patients believe that too much exercise will be harmful to them, that is going to directly interfere with them being willing to participate in an exercise program. And so it can be helpful to learn about what the beliefs are and values and normal practices of that particular group are, so that you can design an intervention that will address those beliefs or work around them, work within them, and acknowledge the values and feelings and thoughts of the people in that culture. Also, ethnography is another way to identify inequalities and rules that guide behavior. So ethnography is used to compare, in some cases, different cultures and how their beliefs, values, and practices might be different, and how maybe they're given an unequal or an inequitable resources, depending on what their beliefs and values might be. So there's a lot to study here. It's a very rich area. All right, case studies. So we can have case studies in quantitative and in qualitative research. A case study is the story of one particular person, or it could be one particular entity of some kind. So it could be one like organization, or one hospital, one school. So it's one entity, one individual of whatever it is that is having an experience. So in qualitative research, it'll highlight a specific issue or tell a story from that particular person or entity, whoever it is that you're studying. So case studies are ranked toward the bottom of the kind of tower of evidence, with experimental research being all the way at the top and case studies being pretty close to the bottom, because if we're looking at only the experience or the story of one person or one institution, we can't expect that that experience will also apply to us or to whatever group it is that we're trying to understand. That's the beauty of these other larger, more broad studies, where we're including lots of participants so that we can take those results and maybe they'll be a bit more generalizable. In qualitative research, it's not necessarily generalizable. It depends on who was part of your study, what participants you drew from. But in quantitative research, it definitely is going to be more generalizable, meaning that we can take those results and expect those results to apply to other people that are very similar to those participants. But in a case study, if you only have one participant, then you can't expect those results to apply to other participants or other people who are similar to that person, because it's only one experience. But at the same time, case studies are still beneficial. They exist for a reason, because we still have something to learn. If there's a very specific and interesting case, it could be a very unique, one of a kind of situation, then it's still worthy of writing up the case study for publication so that the world can learn about whatever it is that happened to this person, or whatever the experience was of this one person. So something doesn't have to be generalizable for it to be interesting and for it to maybe influence your ideas or beliefs about a particular group or a particular situation. So case studies are useful, but ranked much lower on kind of the hierarchy of evidence than our other types of qualitative studies, and especially quantitative studies. All right, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.